It's good to see so many people who've come along today. What you're just thinking about what Zareen said at the beginning, that episode she talked about and the effect that it had on the children concerned. What that tells me is when we fight, we need to win. And I believe we can win if we put our minds to it. And that's part of what I want to talk about. Even a few months ago, we've been talking at a meeting like this, very few people in Scotland actually knew anything about Prevent. And that was true even in the institutions like schools, like local authorities, like universities, where Prevent was already starting to be implemented. That's beginning to change now. If you're a student at Edinburgh University, or for that matter, if you belong to an organisation, for instance, the Edinburgh May Day Committee, that wants to book a room at Edinburgh University, what you'll have to do is fill in a Prevent risk assessment form. It's getting very close to home now. If you're a guidance teacher in many parts of Scotland, you may well have already been on Prevent training. If you haven't, you're probably soon going to go on Prevent training. If you're an ordinary school teacher in Glasgow, and I think probably in other areas of Scotland too, you'll be getting your Prevent training at the end of the summer break. You'll still find, if you talk to teachers in schools around Scotland, they'll still tell you, I don't know anything about Prevent training, about Prevent in general. They will very soon. There was a big launch at Lord's Secondary School in Glasgow a few weeks ago. There's supposed to be roadshows promoting Prevent run by Education Scotland, so the people who don't know anything about Prevent, they're going to know about it in the next few months. In local authorities, people who quite recently were telling me Prevent isn't happening in their workplace, some of those people have, in the last month or so, found themselves attending Prevent training. So this is happening, it's happening right under our noses. What is Prevent? Well, firstly, I must say I agree completely with what Peter and Hella both said, that what Prevent really is part of an assault on the Stop the War movement and part of an assault on internationalism generally. What it officially is a government programme supposedly intended to stop people turning into terrorists. It's not a social programme, it's not a child protection programme, however much it might dress itself up in those things. It's an arm of an overall counter-terrorist strategy called Contest, and it's linked to defence policy, to intelligence, to policing. In Scotland, its activity is now increasing very rapidly, mainly because of the coming into force of the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act 2015. The Prevent Light that Zareen referred to in Scotland, that's a thing of the past. What's coming now isn't Prevent Light. What's coming now is the premium edition. Be ready for it. The Counter-Terrorism and Security Act tells public bodies, that's schools, local authorities, the NHS, universities, colleges of further education, that they have to do Prevent. Here it's important to understand, Prevent isn't supposed to deal with criminal plots. It's supposed to deal with what police call the pre-criminal space. That's police thinking for you, pre-criminal space. That's what the rest of us call lawful space. That's what we live in all the time. Prevent aims to influence the way that people think about political issues that the government says are linked to terrorism. Public sector workers are being taught how to identify individuals whose thoughts about those sorts of things are so off-message that they need to be sent on de-radicalisation courses. In some respects, all of this isn't exactly new. Establishment manipulation of how people think isn't new. Just this week, we've been seeing how police, politicians, their friends in the media, succeeded for 27 years in maintaining a lie about the Hillsborough tragedy. But that worked the way establishment manipulation usually works in Britain. It worked through mutual back-scratching in the old boys' club. It worked through senior police officers knowing whose side they were on. Prevent's different from that. Prevent creates a formal structure for social engineering. It puts the police somewhere near the centre of that, at MI5 just off stage. It enlists ordinary people, teachers, doctors, social workers, lecturers, to do most of that work. This is a police state, not something that might become a police state, a police state. It's a slightly novel form. It's configured in ways that aren't quite the way you see in the movies, that aren't quite from the stories from from 1930s Germany or 1970s East Germany, but it's a form of police state all the same. The good news is that a lot of public sector unions, the UCU, the NUT, the NUS, EIS, are all opposed to Prevent. The STUC is also opposed to Prevent as a result of a motion passed at the STUC annual congress just last week. So we are in a position to fight back. We do have the tools to fight back. What does Prevent actually do? What does it, this police state searchlight, what is it turned on? Well, the current version of Prevent says it officially focuses on something that it calls violent extremism, plus as well as that, something that it calls Islamist extremism. There's a distinction there. Islamist extremism doesn't have to be violent to get covered by Prevent. Extremism isn't defined in the law, but it is defined in a Prevent document as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values. That could mean pretty much anything you please, and that's the point of it. It's a phrase outside the law that anybody can make up whatever they want around. Violent extremism doesn't mean an act of violence. Remember, we're talking about the pre-criminal space here. We're not talking about criminal plots. Violent extremism means something along the lines of sympathy for violence, which could mean sympathy for armed action against an overseas government. Islamist extremism isn't defined anywhere at all, but the Prevent duty guidance that's now incorporated into the law in Scotland and elsewhere in Britain, well, it doesn't define it. It gives some symptoms of it. It says, Islamist extremists regard Western intervention in Muslim-majority countries as a war with Islam, creating a narrative of them and us. So, if you look out at the world, or even if you look at Prevent, and you come to the conclusion that maybe there's a war with Islam going on, then you're probably an Islamist extremist. Because if you're not Muslim, you're probably not actually going to be counted as an Islamist extremist. So I can think these things quite safely. A Muslim cannot think those things. This is discriminatory and Islamophobic. It's not an accidental consequence of how Prevent is implemented. It's written into statutory guidance that carries the logos of both the UK and the Scottish governments. Although it's here in Scotland, Prevent hardly operates in Northern Ireland. When Theresa Villiers, the Northern Ireland Secretary, was asked last July about that, what she told Parliament is Prevent forms one part of contest. The primary focus of contest is countering international terrorism, not domestic-related terrorism, which is the principal threat in Northern Ireland. You have to remember that international terrorism, in government speak, includes homegrown terrorism carried out by British Muslims, even though the government will then say that their action has nothing to do with foreign policy. And you have to remember that according to Prevent, terrorism, Northern Ireland-related terrorism, is domestic terrorism. Prevent policy on this side of the Irish Sea does in fact include Northern Ireland-related terrorism, which it says is a secondary problem compared with Islamist terrorism. So Prevent isn't good enough to deal with Northern Irish terrorism in Northern Ireland. Perhaps people there suspect that it would be so inflammatory and counterproductive that it would be better not used. But here in Scotland, Northern Ireland-related terrorism is a selling point of the Prevent strategy and is used to argue that it doesn't just focus on Islamist extremism. Of course, all that's nonsense. Of course, all that's just camouflage to deflect the allegations that Prevent's Islamophobic. Prevent training teaches public sector staff, that's teachers, lecturers, doctors for that matter, how to look for signs of extremism. It uses videos of so-called case studies. If the trainer thinks that the videos of Islamist extremism may be a bit controversial, perhaps they've got the audience for the training are a white left-leaning audience who might not approve of Islamophobic implications, then the trainer will probably pick one of the videos dealing with far-right extremism instead, and then people will go away and say, well, that's fine, this deals with far-right extremism. It doesn't. This is about what the government calls international terrorism. The trainees attending these courses are told to look for three types of behavioural issues that they can watch out for: emotional, verbal, physical, circumstantial factors, or there might be a complicated combination of these things. It says that under the emotional behaviours category you should watch out for crying, quick temper, mood swings, sullenness, general demeanour. Teachers in secondary schools teaching teenagers are going to be receiving this training. In England, what happened, supposing you do spot somebody who's a bit sullen and happens also to be Muslim, and you feel that it might be a good idea to report them as being vulnerable to radicalisation. What happens next? Well, in England, that referral would come before, it goes through a programme called Channel. In Scotland, we don't, the same programme essentially in Scotland isn't called Channel, it's called Prevent Professional Concerns. In England, the referral would go before a local channel panel, a multi-agency panel. In Scotland, the referral comes before a multi-agency meeting. It isn't a standing panel, it's a meeting put together in an ad hoc way for that purpose. This is the big difference that when the Justice Secretary Michael Matheson was talking about Prevent to council held, a seminar held by the Muslim Council of Scotland, the only difference he could come up with was to say that we don't have Channel in Scotland, we have Prevent Professional Concerns. What he means is we have a different meaning, a different name for it. He wasn't fool enough to say that what we have is meetings instead of panels, because if he'd said that, everybody would probably have laughed at him. So that's the situation. A referral goes through the police. When it reaches the meeting, the police are always at the meeting. Remember that these meetings are supposedly dealing with non-criminal behaviour. Remember that the person they're discussing may be a child, maybe a university student. The number of referrals in Scotland so far has been really tiny. But Prevent has so far hardly been happening in Scotland. This year we're seeing a massive increase in the number of people trained in Prevent. We can expect to see before too long an increase in the number of referrals. Prevent is a political theatre that makes an example of Muslims. What it's really trying to do, though, is not targeted just at Muslims. What it's trying to do is police the way that all of us think about Britain's relationship with the world. It's doing this at a time when North Africa and the Middle East are in the grip of conflicts set in motion by US and British wars, when refugees are drowning in the Mediterranean to reinforce Europe's borders, when fascism is growing in various parts of Europe, fueled not by anti-Semitism, whatever anybody would have you believe, but fueled by Islamophobia. If we let the police supervise the way that we discuss all these matters, with absolutely no chance whatever of building a progressive politics, no chance whatever of fighting austerity, no chance of dealing with what some people call bread and butter issues. This is a small world. If we can't talk about international issues without the police breathing over our shoulders, we can't talk about anything. Prevents one of the biggest political challenges we face. It's easy to beat, but only if we try to beat it, only if we involve a lot of people, only if we involve the organisations that have the strength to do so, the trade unions. Just say no to prevent. Don't take any excuses. Don't let anybody tell you that they have to implement prevent. At least don't let them tell you that unless they can show you a court order. And that's very important. Because people will say, we have to implement prevent because it's the law. Okay, what has to happen before the law can take any action against somebody not implementing prevent? What has to happen is that a recommendation has to be made by the Prevent Oversight Board. If it's dealing with a public body in Scotland, Scottish ministers, well, in fact, probably their representatives, but in principle, Scottish ministers have to be represented, that they have to be included in the Prevent Oversight Board. If the board comes up with a recommendation for action, what that will mean is the Home Secretary, Theresa May, will then have to apply to the Court of Session in Edinburgh for an order of specific implement. That order would be directed, presumably, at senior executives in the institution that was held to be not sufficiently complying with prevent. So if you're talking about Edinburgh University, that order would have to be directed at probably Professor Sir Timothy O'Shea, the principal of the university. Maybe it would also have to be directed at the Chancellor of the university, Princess Anne. This is a fairy tale. It shouldn't scare anybody over the age of 4 years old. If you think this is a serious legal process, really, then every evening you should probably check your potted geraniums in case they're going to turn into a beanstalk and reach up into the sky with a giant at the top. This is nonsense. Don't let universities, don't let schools tell you they have to implement prevent. There's additional problems somewhere because there's other regulatory mechanisms. That's a separate issue about how all this is embedded into the bureaucracy. But if they tell you we have to do it because of the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, tell them, stop doing it, go away and tell me that when you've got a court order in your hand. And until you've got that, don't hide behind the law. Let's say no to prevent. Thank you.